Just a few. Well, I'm gonna get started in just a few minutes. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. And we have our question of the day coming up too. Hey everyone. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Feel free to answer the question of the day. Do you know anyone who has donated blood?
Oh.
Hey everyone, we'll get started in just a few minutes. Feel free to answer the question of the day, and we're gonna get started soon.
I love seeing the answers.
Yep. Welcome everyone. We'll get started in about 1 more minute. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat or comment anything.
All right, everybody, let's get started. Welcome, Alliance HOSA members, to our March guest speaker event. Good evening, I am Mansa Prasad, and just to introduce myself, I'm the Secretary of Alliance HOSA, and I'm so excited to be here tonight with you guys to learn more about the importance of a blood drive and donating.
I'm Aditi, part of the Sophomore Council, and I'm so eager to get started. And it's so fascinating to see how many people have already donated blood or know someone who has.
Yes, we'll be touching topics from why donating blood is important all the way to our ongoing blood drive. So without further ado, I am pleased to announce tonight's guest speaker, Mrs. Mahan. We are so excited to have you as our March guest speaker.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. And March, I'm sure y'all don't know, is Red Cross Month. So it's a great time frame for y'all to have us and to have me so that we can talk about the Red Cross and the importance of blood donation. Thank you.
So could you please introduce yourself to all of our members?
Yes. So I am Daryl Mahan. I am a general recruitment account manager too. I've been working for the Red Cross for 8.5 years, and I am basically charged with finding organizations to post blood drive. So I work with schools, businesses, individuals, and it's my job to do all the pre-planning for the blood drives and educate my sponsors so that they know how to recruit blood donors and so that we're getting enough donors to blood drives to meet the need of our patients, both here locally and throughout the country. I do want to preface tonight before I get started that I am not a medical professional. I don't have a medical background, but I do work in a medical field. So I know just enough to be dangerous as far as blood's concerned. So y'all may stump me tonight with some of your thoughtful questions. And, you know, if I don't have an answer for you, I certainly can reach out to our medical director, Dr. Lasky, and get answers for you. So if we're going to get a little more complex than we usually do in the talk tonight, since I won't be focusing on how to volunteer at the blood drive. We're going to talk about diversity in our blood supply and what that means. And so when we get to those things that are more complex, if y'all have more questions, then, you know, I may need to go to outside sources for that. Okay, we can go to the next slide.
Perfect. Ms. Mahan is going to start us off with presenting her PowerPoint, and we have a chance for questions at the end. So let's get started. And a quick reminder to leave any questions you have in the chat, and we'll get to them.
Absolutely. And so tonight, we're going to talk about who the American Red Cross is, some basic blood facts that if you've heard me talk before, we've been through. So I'm kind of going to go through those quickly. If you haven't heard me talk before and you have questions about those, please, you know, let us know and I can slow down and talk some more about that, or we can leave them till the end. And then I want to talk to y'all just briefly also about the importance of young blood donors and why we partner with high schools and why that's so important and how we've missed y'all during the COVID pandemic. And then we'll get into the diversified blood donors and questions and answers. Okay, so we can go to the next one. So who's the American Red Cross? Basically, we work at home and around the world to prevent and alleviate human suffering in the face of emergencies. Just to summarize what's on the slide, we help disaster victims when there's a hurricane, a home fire, a tornado, etc. We teach skills like CPR and even babysitting and other things like that. Also, we provide service to the military and their families. If they're overseas and they need to get home for someone, you know, is having a medical emergency here, we provide, we're their liaison and help them coordinate their travel and things like that. And then also we do blood drives through our biomedical services. And I know y'all have partnered with us through some humanitarian services projects this year, and that's been exciting. And we look forward to partnering with you again with the blood program. Okay, we can go to the next slide. All right, so nearly every second of every day, someone is assisted by the Red Cross. That's a pretty big statement. So by partnering with the Red Cross, you're aligning yourself with one of the largest, most trusted nonprofit organizations in America. Through our network of about 230 chapters across the U.S., we have a presence in every community. Within our global Red Cross partners, we comprise the largest humanitarian networks in the world. The Red Cross provides services, again, on all military installations in the U.S. and also those overseas. And we provide about 40% of the U.S. blood supply through more than 500 blood drives and donation centers across the country each day. So just remember, you know, when we're having a blood drive at Alliance, we're also having a lot of other blood drives that day to help us meet the needs of the patients. Okay, next slide. So again, we'll start talking in more detail about blood now, but some of you probably heard me speak, so I'm just going to kind of go more quickly through this section. All right, next slide. Every 2 seconds, someone needs blood. 1 unit of blood can help save 3 lives, and I'll explain that a little bit more in just a second. And each year, 4.5 million lives are saved by blood transfusions. Remember, blood cannot be manufactured in a laboratory, so we rely on our gracious donors to come in and donate blood. Okay, next slide. So we have, when we collect 1 unit of whole blood, we can make 3 separate products for patients out of that. And if you want to click, just go ahead and click 3 times and it'll show the products that we use. It's plasma, red blood cells, and platelets. You'll see that the 4th component of blood is white blood cells, and we do not typically transfuse that to patients. That would only come in a very rare situation, and a doctor would work with the Red Cross to find a very specific match for a patient if we're going to transfuse white blood cells. Okay, go to the next slide. So these are the 4 components of blood, and if you want to go ahead and click through 4 times, I know y'all know this. Red cells carry oxygen, white cells fight infection, plasma is the liquid part of the blood, and platelets clot. So again, we don't typically transfuse white blood cells, and sometimes people say, well, that doesn't make sense because it fights infection. So if someone's sick, why can't we transfuse the white blood cells? But it's because the white blood cells are specific to a person. So if you transfuse my white blood cells into a patient, my white blood cells might not recognize some of the good parts of their blood and might actually attack that and make them more sick. So again, we want to as closely match a patient to a donor as possible, and we can do that through our rare reference lab, but we want to do that and we want to work with the doctors before doing that. Okay, we can go to the next page. All right, so if you want to click through 2 times, yeah. So red blood cells last 42 days after they're donated. Go ahead and click one more time. Plasma can last up to 1 year because we can flash freeze it, and then platelets last up to 5 days. So what that means is, just like medication that you get over the counter at CVS or prescription medicine that you get, it has an expiration date on it. So blood products, it's not that if we give them to a patient at the 45th day, if we gave them red blood cells, that you know, something terrible would happen. It's just that they're not as effective as they would be if we gave it to them earlier in that cycle. So a lot of hospitals, the contracts that we have with them, they specify how old the product can be before we give it to them. So some hospitals, our contracts might say that they don't get red blood cells after 23 days. But of course, right now during the pandemic, we are transfusing or using the blood much more quickly than it's coming in. All right, go ahead to the next page. So these are just some typical uses for these blood products. This is certainly not all of the reasons that we would use them, but the most common, red cells can be used for cancer, trauma, or sickle cell. And we'll talk a lot about sickle cell in a little bit. And then plasma we can use for burn victims, shock and organ transplants, and then platelets are used most commonly for chemotherapy patients. Okay, so when we draw blood at the blood drive, we also take test tubes and we send those to a lab, and they test for a variety of diseases like HIV, West Nile, hepatitis, syphilis. They also test for blood type, and they're going to test for blood type every single time that you donate, even though your blood type won't change. But it's really important that we match the blood to the patient correctly. And then currently we are testing for COVID-19 antibodies to identify possible convalescent plasma donors. We have put a pause in that program. The FDA has asked us to stop collecting convalescent plasma currently because they're going to change the requirement for that and the number of antibodies that need to be present in the blood for us to use it as convalescent plasma. So they're just changing some of the things, the guidelines that we'll have for that. But we have enough to serve patients right now, and we'll pick back up on that in a little while. And then also, as part of our sickle cell disease initiative, we are going to start testing donors who identify as African American for the sickle cell trait, and we'll start that in April. Okay, so go on to the next slide. Okay, so you can click through the, yeah. So, when we're talking about blood groups, we're talking about the letters of the blood type, okay? So O has neither A or B antigens. A has just A antigens. B has just B antigens. AB has both A and B antigens. And this is really important for us to know because you cannot transfuse blood to a patient with an antigen that they don't already have. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. And then when we start talking about blood types, that's when we're adding the positive or the negative, and that depends on the Rh factor of their blood or the absence or presence of the D antigen. Negatives can give to both positives and negatives because, again, positives can only give to positives because you can't give an antigen to someone that they don't already have. Okay, so now if you'll go to the next slide, oops. Yep, that slide. This slide is just a visual so that you can see, if you look across on the slide, you'll see who those blood types are able to donate to, what patient types, blood types. And if you look going down, that's who those patients can receive blood from. So O negative, if you look across, they can give to anyone, but when you look down, they can only receive blood from other O negative donors, because again, they don't have the A, B, or D antigen. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I know I'm flying through this, y'all. All right, this is where I want to kind of slow down a little bit. So the reason that we come to high schools for our blood drives, we have several reasons. CMV is one of the major reasons, and one of the reasons, one of the things that we've really missed about partnering with our high schools and colleges during the COVID pandemic. So we have some incentives that we've been trying to do for young donors, you know, where we'll give a $10 gift card if they come to a blood drive to donate. We're just trying to get them active in other blood drives because we need CMV negative blood so badly. And I'll talk specifically about it in just a second. But we also come to blood drives because we want y'all to get involved in the blood program when you're young. We want to have an opportunity to educate you about why it's so important. And we want you to become lifelong donors or even just ambassadors for blood donation. Okay, but specifically, when we're talking about CMV negative, it stands for cytomegalovirus negative. CMV is a flu-like virus that most people encounter during their lifetime, and it's usually harmless, and most people don't even know they've been exposed. So if we'll go to the next slide. In the US, about 50 to 85% of people are CMV positive by the age of 40 years old. CMV can be harmful to premature babies, organ transplant patients, and other individuals with compromised immune systems. And CMV negative blood transfusions are very important for those individuals. So obviously, if they can't, if it's going to be harmful to them to get blood from a CMV positive donor, we need to give them CMV negative blood. And that's one of the main reasons why it's so important for us to tap into the young donor base. Okay. All right, now we're going to get into the meat of what I really want to talk about. And I'm a little bit anxious about talking to y'all about this tonight. I haven't done this by myself before. This is a brand new initiative that the American Red Cross is starting, diversifying the blood donor population so that we can support sickle cell patients. The reason that we have this as a new initiative is because we are not meeting the needs of these patients. Okay, next slide. All right, so first let's talk about some health inequities in diverse Americans. So if on this chart, let's look at the average life expectancy of men and women from different racial backgrounds. The average US population is represented in gray. Blue represents the white population and green represents the Black population. You can see for both men and women, the life expectancy for the population is distinctly lower in African Americans. So we need, well, let me just go back. While there are numerous reasons that contribute to these inequities, one of these drivers is unique genetics that underlies certain disease processes. And what this does is create unique needs for matching blood transfusion, bone marrow, and organ transplants. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide. All right, so one significant challenge for us among the African American community is trust. And this is something that I think y'all should really look into and research on your own. It's very interesting and really tragic what the Black community went through with the Tuskegee experiment. But the African American community has unfortunately developed a mistrust of the medical and scientific field due to atrocities such as the Tuskegee experiment, which betrayed the Black community for 40 years. And segregationist practices extended even into transfusion medicine, whereby Black blood was transfused to only Black people. So over the last several decades, with our advanced understanding of DNA and genetics, the medical and scientific communities are coming full circle. So while that was a segregationist policy back then, now we're realizing that it's an important component to health and maintaining health. Organizations such as Be the Match, which identify matches for bone marrow transplants, have turned their attention to these health disparities. And we've come to understand that blood and organs from genetically similar donors have much better outcomes. On the flip side, lack of those donors is a barrier to adequate health care for patients of color. So again, if you really want to do some homework and some interesting stuff, I would look into that. Okay, so next slide. So one disease that has a disproportionate impact on diverse populations is sickle cell disease. This disease is the result of a single genetic defect in hemoglobin, the protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen. This causes the red blood cells to take on their sickled shape. So the top graphic shows healthy red blood cells. It's a little blurry on my screen, but they're nice and circular, and they are moving single file through the smallest blood vessels, which are of course called capillaries. I know y'all know that. And they're maximizing oxygen delivery. The lower graphic though shows how the misshapen sickle cell red blood cells get stuck in the capillaries and thus cannot deliver oxygen to the tissue. Okay, so go on. And then these are just ways that sickle cell disease can manifest itself in a patient. So it's a devastating disease that affects the whole body. The most common thing that sickle cell patients have is a pain crisis. They have severe pain all over their body, and it does not respond to pain medication. One of the most common reasons sickle cell patients present to the emergency department is pain. They also have issues with stroke because of impaired blood flow and oxygenation to the brain. And it is one of the main causes of stroke in children. They have acute chest syndrome, impaired blood flow, oxygenation to the lungs, pneumonia, infection in the lungs, kidney failure, their bone tissue can die, osteonecrosis of the liver, of the bones, blindness, heart failure. These are just some of the things that they can battle, and their life expectancy is 45 years. So obviously very young life expectancy. However, it is a significant improvement over the last couple decades. Their life expectancy used to be in the mid-20s. So we are making progress, but of course we need to do a better job. Okay, next slide. So on this slide, we just want to highlight that it's the most common inherited blood disease in the U.S. It affects 1 of every 365 Black or African American births and affects approximately 100,000 Americans. So if you look at the slide with the parents, each of those has a sickle cell trait. Does not mean that they have sickle cell disease, okay, but they carry a trait. So if they have children, 1 in 4 of those children will not have the trait or sickle cell disease. 2 of those 4 children could have, 2 in 4 chance, could have the sickle cell trait passed on. And then 1 in 4 chance that their child would have sickle cell disease. So that's pretty high, 25% is a pretty high chance for their child to have sickle cell. And this is one of the things, one of the reasons why we're going to start testing for sickle cell trait. We're hoping that it might encourage the African American community to start coming in and donating more. So if we'll go to the next slide, you can see this is a census from 2010, and it's just showing the red areas are where there's a higher African American population. So you can see why we're kind of focusing on this in Georgia and in the Southeast. But this is an initiative for us across the nation. Okay, go to the next slide. Now we can see specifically in Georgia where our patients with sickle cell disease live, not where they're treated, but where they live. So if you can see Forsyth County, it's really hard to tell. I mean, I know where it is, but it's hard to tell which of those blues it is. So we have anywhere from 12 to 50 patients in Forsyth County alone. All right. So treatment for sickle cell disease is blood transfusion. It's the most important therapy for them. So there are simple transfusions, which means they just receive blood. That requires the least amount of blood, 1 to 2 units. But the best treatment for them is an exchange transfusion. And that is where they are connected to an apheresis machine. That's what you see in this picture. And their blood is replaced. So it goes through this machine and the sickled cells are pulled out. The red cells are pulled out and replaced with the new red blood cells. Now this takes anywhere from 3 to 10 units each time that they have a transfusion. And this is must be repeated periodically to reduce and prevent manifestations of the disease such as stroke. So if you look at the bottom bullet, it's the most important. A sickle cell disease program with 10 patients consumes 360 to 1,200 units of blood each year. So that's a lot of donors that we're trying to find to help these patients. Okay, and it gets even more complex. So why do we need diversity in the blood supply? Remember, genetics are kind of what we're looking for, but we need diversity to meet transfusion needs of these specialty patients. We need to limit RBC protein exposure and RBC antibody formation. So again, this is something that you could really research on your own if you want, where we're talking about RBC protein exposure or antigens versus antibodies. So, you know, that's a good thing for it. And we can go into it a little bit if you want to later, but that's something that I think is really interesting, the antibody versus the antigen. So a sickle cell patient has a high likelihood of developing Aloe immunization. But I have that somewhere else, so we'll talk about that. Okay, and generally, closest RBC protein match for a patient requiring frequent transfusions come from donors of the same ethnic or genetic background. Okay, so we're going to talk about, here's a good graph to explain that. Go to the next slide. Okay, so if we took an African American sickle cell disease patient with a particular blood type profile where they are positive for big D, little c, and little e, K negative, JKB negative. Okay, that's what we're looking for our patient. And we screened 250 units of blood from Caucasian donors. If you'll go to the next slide, we'll find 1 unit of blood that might match them. Okay, now if you'll go to the next slide, we would find, if we screened 250 African American donors, we would find 28 matches for them. So again, super important. When we're talking about race in the United States with the census data, 13.4% are Black or African American and 76.5% are Caucasian. And if you go to the next slide, this is our demographics of our blood donors. So you'll see that the population of our donor base is 86.3 Caucasian and only 3.6 African American. This discrepancy between the general population and donor population makes it very hard to provide matched blood for sickle cell patients. Okay, next slide. So what happens when we can't find matched blood? The patients will go without a transfusion, or they'll get transfused with mismatched blood. Let's see, repeatedly receiving mismatched blood results in something called Aloe Immunization that I mentioned earlier. And that basically means that they're going to have an immune response to non-self antigens. So remember, when we were talking about blood type, you can't get an antigen that you don't already have. It's not that it's going to create a fatal reaction, but if they build up too many antigens, or if they have too many antigens transfused, then they're going to build up too many antibodies, and then that definitely could happen. Okay, so you can go back now. I just want to talk about a case study with a particular patient. This is JT. She's a 23-year-old African-American woman who has sickle cell disease complicated by frequent episodes of severe pain crisis. She's been hospitalized with lung complications over 20 times. Her bone tissue is dying. She's had to have a hip replacement. Y'all, she's 23 and she's had a hip replacement. Her spleen has been removed and her gallbladder's been removed. Okay, next slide. So this slide really just want to highlight, she's been transfused about 100 times in her life. She's already developed 9 antibodies, and they're listed there. We've identified a total of 8 donors who are a match for her. So basically, we ask them not to donate unless JT needs blood. And then when she goes into the hospital with a crisis or she needs a transfusion, we'll call and schedule one of those donors to donate for her, or multiple donors, depending on what they're going to do. And then one of those 8 donors has been supporting JT for much of her life and is now ineligible due to age and health conditions. So when we say ineligible due to age, there is no upper age limit for someone to give blood. They could be 110 years old. As long as the doctor says they're healthy enough and they're not on medications that would defer them, they can still come donate blood. But most people, as they start to age, get on some sort of medication or have some sort of health issue where their doctors recommend that they don't donate anymore. Okay, next slide. So we're going to kind of bring it all together for you. Oh, I don't have this. Oh, yeah, I do. Okay. Sorry about that. I flipped too many pages. So basically, the most important takeaways are sickle cell disease patients are transfusion dependent for life. We are not meeting the needs of the patients, contributing to health inequities in the African American community. Failure to treat them appropriately has serious consequences, including decreased life expectancy. Patients are dependent on specific individual donors who are genetically similar, meaning African American donors provide the best matched blood for African Americans with sickle cell disease. And we need people who will become lifelong donors because their blood may help keep someone alive. Okay. All right, next slide. And then these are ways that you can help. So if you're not African American, that's fine. But you can become a blood donor and you can help other patients. You can still help African American patients. But other ways, if you're not eligible to donate, you can host a blood drive. Obviously, y'all do that at school when we're not in a pandemic. You can help recruit donors. You can encourage repeat blood donors. Y'all have certainly been doing that with the virtual blood drive, and we appreciate that. You can volunteer to become an ambassador or an influencer. You can request a presentation like you did for tonight. You can help us spread our social media messaging, so you can follow the American Red Cross on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram and just share those messages. And you can support our educational efforts, which is why I wanted to talk to y'all tonight about sickle cell disease, so that you can help us spread that messaging. And then you can also invest in our mission. Okay. So that's really it for me. Did I go too fast? Pretty good.
No, that was perfect. That was a wonderful presentation, Ms. Mahan. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
So now we're going to transition into the Q&A session of the night. So I'll go ahead and start with a question, just to ease everyone in. So what are some ways for students to become more involved with the Red Cross? You said something about teen volunteering and becoming a Red Cross ambassador. Could you go into detail about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So to be a Red Cross ambassador, you have to be 15 years or older. I think a 15-year-old still needs a parent to accompany them. If you're interested, y'all can email me and I will connect you with volunteer services. Basically, to be a volunteer ambassador, you would need to volunteer 5 hours a month to keep that active, okay? Hey, you know what? I'm looking at myself and I forgot to turn on my light. Look how fancy I am, y'all.
Whoa, that's so cool.
I think I'm styling. Okay, sorry. I just had to show you that because my daughter was having a heart attack. But so volunteer services is a way, but obviously you can participate through the school blood drives. You can participate on your own individually and do your own blood drive. We do have a Leaders Save Lives program where students can host their own blood drives, and they can, what we do is y'all find a site for it. I can help you with some ideas, but let's just say the community building at one of our Parks and Rec locations, we reserve that, and then you do the recruitment and the advertising for the blood drive. We want to have a minimum goal to collect 25 units of blood, so you've got to be prepared to really work it and get those people there, because remember, if we schedule a blood drive, then our hospital partners are depending on us to provide that. So the people that work in hospital services are looking at our blood drive schedule and they're saying, okay, you need this much blood by this certain date because of surgeries and procedures you're planning on. And yes, we're going to bring in that much because we know Alliance Academy is having their blood drive that day and they're going to collect 25 units of blood. So we're forecasting to the hospitals what we're going to be able to provide to them based on those goals. So they're really important. So if you want to do that, you just really need to be dedicated and ready to do that. Okay. Did I answer all of it? Okay.
Yeah, donating blood is really important. So can you talk more about how a virtual blood drive works and how do you make that appointment?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's super easy to do the virtual blood drive. We've had a Sleeves Up campaign for a very long time, but a lot of corporations and schools didn't necessarily like doing those because we weren't able to track the number of appointments that were scheduled. So when COVID hit, we had to get more creative on how to partner with our schools specifically. So the virtual blood drives actually give you a link or the QR code that you can scan or click the link, and that takes you to our scheduling website. The virtual blood drive is great because anyone that is in the US and has a Red Cross blood drive near them can use your link to schedule. So if you have relatives in North Carolina, you could call them and say, hey, will you donate blood? And my school will get credit for it. The reason that's important is because those pints that you're scheduling through the virtual blood drive are still counting for your totals for the high school scholarship program, where we give a senior, a scholarship based on the number of pints collected. So because we're tracking appointments and not pints collected, we give 75% credit. So if you had 100 appointments sign up, then we'll give 75 pints credit toward that high school scholarship program. So, but yeah, that's great. And I'm glad that y'all have been doing that. Thank you.
Now, could you go through the process of donating blood, like from signing up all the way to leaving the donation center?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So when you sign up for an appointment, so when you go to that website, you can search by, if you know of a blood drive specific sponsor code because you've seen a flyer, then you could type in that code. But really using your virtual blood drive link, you would type in the zip code of the area where you live, and it'll pull up different options for you. You select which one is convenient for you, which day and time, and then you'll sign up for the appointment that way. In Georgia, remember, you have to be 16 years old to donate blood, and you have to have parent consent. You can get the parent consent form from the website, print that, and take it with you to the blood drive. But if you're 17 and older, you can go ahead and sign up and go to the blood drive. So when you get to the blood drive, well, before you get there, you can do a rapid pass, which is online health history. I don't think the 16-year-old can do that. So they may have to wait till they get to the blood drive. But basically, you're answering your health history questionnaire online before you go to the drive instead of doing it in the health history. And you can only do that on the day of the drive because the very first question is, do you feel well today? So then you'll go to the blood drive. You'll have a temperature check, temperature screening, and we have now a self-screening, a contactless screening machine, which is great. And so before you even come in, we're going to take your temperature because of COVID, and then you're going to register on the computer saying that you're there. And then if you've done the rapid pass, you've already read through questions. If you haven't, you'll have a packet of information to read through. That basically is just going through medications, travel, reasons for deferral, and things like that. Because you might read something and realize, oh, I'm not really eligible to donate blood. And then you can go ahead and leave instead of waiting for us to get you into health history. And then, but then once you get into health history, you're going to have a little mini physical where we're going to check your hemoglobin with a finger stick. And then we're going to check your temperature and your blood pressure and your pulse to make sure you're healthy enough to donate. We'll go through those questions with you, make sure you're eligible. Once you pass health history, you go into the donor room, you give your donation. That usually, once they stick you, usually takes about 7 minutes on average to fill the bag, but the whole time in the chair is probably 20 minutes because they've got to label a bag and all kinds of stuff. And then when you're finished donating, you go to the the canteen, and you get to have a free snack from the Red Cross. So cookies or water. A friend of mine likes to say you get to lose a pound because you give a pint of blood, so you're losing a pound that day. But another benefit is you can't have any strenuous activity, so you can say, hey, Dad, I can't mow the lawn tonight because I gave blood. Or I can't do the dishes because I can't lift anything heavy. Okay, next question.
What are some important reminders that you need to keep in mind before you go to donate blood?
Great question. So we always say eat, drink, sleep, bring photo ID. Okay. So eat iron-rich foods because we want your hemoglobin to be high because we're testing your iron level. Drink plenty of non-caffeinated beverages, even days before you donate, so that you're nice and well hydrated for a couple reasons. One, we want your veins to be nice and plump so that we can find them easily, right? And then also because that reduces your risk of having a reaction at the blood drive. So eat, drink, sleep, get a good night's rest before you donate. And again, just helps reduce your risk of reaction. And then you're going to have photo ID when you come to the blood drive. So be sure to remember to bring that.
So right now we do have our ongoing virtual blood drive like we talked about, but are there any other Red Cross events that are coming up that we could know?
So events like you've done for the humanitarian services or other blood drives events?
Both, sure, anything.
Okay, so I don't know about humanitarian services. I'd have to check into that and see what they have going on. Sometimes that really they just show up at health fairs and things, and they might have a booth, you know. Oh, no, we're getting ready to do, I can't believe they would be so mad at me, y'all, don't tell them. Okay, so we do a program called Sound the Alarm, okay, which means it has to do with fire alarms, okay? So usually we go out into the communities and we have volunteers and then a team will go house to house in certain areas, and they will, one of them will assess the home for, you know, fire safety. Another one will sit down with the family and do their fire plan, like, you know, map out which room and how to get out of the house if there's a fire, and then talk to them about, you know, how important it is for your kids to know where do we meet once we get out of the house so we know everyone's out. So they would go through that fire plan. But anyway, this year we're really focusing on Savannah, but they do still do the Sound the Alarm. They do a lot of cool things with that. For like elderly people, like my mom, she has hearing aids, and I swear if we had a fire, she wouldn't hear the fire alarm. But they can set something under the mattress, and if the fire alarm goes off, it vibrates the bed. So it would wake someone up who's hearing impaired. So they do a lot of really cool stuff with the Sound the Alarm campaign. And they'll test the fire alarms, which of course we always say anytime we change the clocks that we should check our fire alarms. So just test them. So they were telling, you know, that was a big thing with the spring forward was don't forget to check your fire alarms and make sure that they work. So because houses that have fire alarms save lives. And so that's real important. So just, you know, there's things like that, but of course we're just not going into as many houses right now because of COVID. So they're setting up things virtually, and it's looking a little different this year. Last year we canceled the campaign because it was right at the start of COVID. But yeah, they do a lot of cool stuff like that.
A quick reminder for members, we're nearing the end, so if you do have any questions, please drop them in chat. But I have another question for Ms. Mahan. And is there any way to directly like volunteer for the sickle cell program and have like a bigger part?
You know, I'll have to find that out. I don't think so at this time. But that'd be interesting, wouldn't it? If we could find a way to maybe do a campaign, like a online campaign. And they do say to be ambassadors and to connect with us that way. So we're really going to roll this out in April. So let me check into that and see. I'm going to write that down. Ways to connect with Sickle Cell Initiative. But that's great because we could even possibly incorporate that into our high school HOSA chapter of the year activities too. Good idea. So smart.
Okay, we have a question from our members. So have donating regulations increased due to COVID?
Okay, so if you mean like deferral wise, we do have some COVID deferrals, but they're really common sense. So if you've had COVID in the last 14 days, please don't come to a blood drive if it's been less than 14 days. If you've been around someone, been exposed to COVID, you know, in less than 14 days, please don't come to the blood drive. So we are just trying to protect, you know, our blood donors, but we also are trying to protect our volunteers, and we're trying to protect our staff as well. So that really is the only one. Oh, nope. Again, such a good question, because I wouldn't have thought to tell y'all this. We did actually decrease some of our deferral things, and I wanted to talk to y'all about that. So thank you for the question. The some of our deferrals, the FDA at the beginning of COVID relaxed them. So malaria risk, travel to countries that are malaria risk used to be 12-month deferral. They decreased that to 3 months. Tattoos were also decreased, I believe, to 3 months. And there was one other thing that decreased. I think it had to do with the male-to-male contact, that they kind of changed that deferral a little bit. So they did relax some of the things because we were worried about our blood supply and people coming out, and we weren't sure if after they had COVID, if they'd be eligible to donate. You know, at the beginning, nobody really knew what was happening. So the FDA really had to think about some of those deferral regulations that they have for us, and so they adjusted those. But we did have to add, obviously, the ones for COVID. So great question. I'm so glad you asked that.
We have another question from one of our members, and Rashima asks, when do you think in-person blood drives at high schools will start again?
Hey, Rashima. I know we've been emailing about this. I was trying to get a hold of Heidi this week. Heidi Avila is the health facilitator, I think, for the county. She is basically over all of the school nurses, okay? But she just took the job this year, and lo and behold, we hit a pandemic. Well, I guess last year was her first year. And we hit a pandemic, and she had to come up with all the COVID regulations. Can you believe it? That would be, I was like, Heidi, she's a good friend of mine. And I was like, man, you picked a bad year to start that job. So she's been working really tirelessly with all of the COVID quarantines and things like that with the schools, and trying to keep everybody safe. So the last time we talked about possibly late April, but I have canceled all the school drives because, you know, we have to know for sure once we get into a certain window of time whether or not a blood drive is going to run. And if they're not, we've got to replace it because we have to have the blood no matter what. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to start them next fall. I don't have her official okay yet, but because she said she thought by late spring we'd be okay, and because I wanted to contact her this week because Saturday they did a big vaccination thing for the teachers in the county. So, you know, that's one of our biggest concerns is having outside people come into the school, and, you know, who are they going to possibly spread COVID to? So, you know, we've been talking this whole time about when can we get back in the schools. We have been going to other schools, just not Forsyth County. I've been to Dawson County. I've been to Pickens High School. And then a lot of my coworkers have been going into schools as well. But, you know, been really proud of Forsyth and how they're handling the pandemic and what Heidi's done, and look forward to getting back hopefully next year. Now, we might be able to partner with y'all over the summer. We like to do a summer blood drive. So if you know, she says that we can go ahead and start doing drives, y'all also might be able to start volunteering for our blood drives as a HOSA, you know, group and through Alliance or whatever. Of course, you can volunteer on your own, but we don't really want to promote that because I don't want to upset the schools and then us not be able to partner with y'all anymore. So that's why we really haven't advertised that, but hopefully we'll be able to do that. Okay.
All right. I think we have 2 more questions.
Okay, great.
Sammy asks, 3 more questions. Oops. Sammy asks, have you donated blood and does it hurt?
Okay. So I have donated blood one time. And yeah. I am, just so y'all know, I'm terrified of needles, okay? And not so much anymore, but when I was younger, I was at Georgia, and I guess they made an announcement before my class that there was a big need for blood and there was a blood drive happening. So I marched myself straight to the blood drive, and I donated, and they kept trying to stop my donation. because I was bleeding too slowly. So your blood can clot. Now I know what was happening, but then I didn't. And I was like, you've stuck me. I'm going to fill that bag. And it was like, I sat there probably 20 minutes trying to fill a bag. And my veins were much smaller then. And I was much thinner. But they said, you probably shouldn't donate again. And I think I sat at the canteen for 2 hours. So I was not prepared, right? I didn't properly hydrate. I didn't eat, probably hadn't eaten all day. I think I probably had 4 or 5 packs of cookies at the end. So I'm not a good example. But I will say that the thing that hurts the most is the finger prick when you're in health history, because that's where your nerve endings are and the tips of your fingers. If you want to kind of know what it feels like, you can just pinch yourself right here in the crease of your elbow and pinch and pull. And that's really all it feels like. Now, sometimes it stings because the betadine that they use to disinfect that area before they put in the needle, that gets in with the needle sometimes, and that stings a little bit. But other than that, it doesn't really, the donation itself isn't what hurts. So as long as you prepare properly, which again, I did not, you should be good. Yeah. Great question.
We have another question from one of our members.
Okay.
He asked, how do you deal with the lack of blood in certain situations due to the shortages?
Yeah, that's amazing. So what we do is we have different levels of appeals. So we start with urgent need as our blood inventories get low. And our blood inventories, we keep that by blood type, right? So we know, okay, O negative, we might be in a critical need, but the rest of the blood supply, we might have an urgent need. So we can market to our O donors for the critical need. But anyway, so we would go urgent, critical, and then emergency. So what that really means is, at an urgent level, we might have some media coverage, but then once we get to critical, we have, so we may have donors who have preferences for us not to contact them. Those kind of go out the window and we start contacting everybody. When we get to emergency level, we're definitely, we're dialing for dollars with our donor base, trying to get them to schedule. But we're also, our media department, our marketing team is really hitting the media, the local media, and we're trying to find stories, from donors or recipients that they can share. So I think last month there was a story on WSB about a sickle cell disease patient, and she was telling her story. And so things like that, once they get out into the community, it really inspires a lot of people to, especially if they're fearful, it gives them a reason to go try to donate. And then it is a good reminder for other people that do donate. Let's say most people donate once a year, but we obviously have donors that donate every time they're eligible, because you can give whole blood every 56 days, and you can give power red, which is red cell only donation. You can give that every 112 days. So you have to wait in between your donations. You can't go back to back. Platelets, you can donate more frequently. You can donate those every week, but that's a whole different ball game. So we don't do those at our blood drives. Okay, I hope that answered that question.
Yes, for sure. Shivani asks, what is your favorite part about blood drives?
I don't get to go to a lot of the blood drives, but when I do, I really just love talking to our donors because, they're there for a reason. Usually it's a personal reason to be there. They know somebody who needed blood. One of my favorite sponsors who passed away recently, or not recently, she passed away about 4 or 5 years ago, but she hosted a very successful blood drive in a little community, mountain community in Pickens called Big Canoe. I don't know if y'all have heard of that. But she would collect about 80 units of blood there. And they did not tell Miss Joyce no when she asked them to donate blood. They really respected her, but her husband had had cancer, and he had battled for 5 years, and he had passed away, but he received a lot of blood products. So she was just so dedicated. And so a lot of, meeting the donors and hearing their stories and knowing why they're there, it's just, it touches my heart, and it inspires me to continue to do my job every day, because you realize, this is really, it's not only saving patients, but it's touching their families and their friends and their coworkers and, people that they will meet, just giving them more time here to do great things. So it's fun.
We have another questions from one of our members, and she asks, how have hospitals been impacted by this shortage?
Okay, again, another great question. Y'all are awesome. Okay, so basically what happens is, depending on types of blood that we might, be short on and not, we will direct our hospitals. So we have different stages with them as well. We go to sometimes the worst stage is medical order only. So we can only supply them with transfusions that have been medically ordered. Okay, so in other words, when they need it, we'll send it. But usually, when we're not in an urgent need situation or worse, and when we're not in a shortage, they can have a supply in the hospital on hand. So, that it gets into a really dangerous situation. But the way that hospitals manage that too, before we get to the medical, before the doctors have to say, hey, we have to have it, we can have the hospitals cancel elective surgeries to help maintain the blood supply for emergencies only. So there's stair steps that we do, dependent on how critical our blood inventory is.
Sonia asks, what is a unique experience that has happened at a blood drive?
I don't want to tell y'all.
No. Oh, no.
Well, I think that the most unique is when somebody passes out. And the funniest, really, I was at Dawson County High School, and Forsyth County was out of school that day, but they had school. So my daughter graduated from Central a couple of years ago. So she went with me, and she was volunteering at the drive. She had a really good friend that went to Dawson County, so she wanted to see her. And we were, working the drive, registration and canteen, and a student came in, and he was like, yeah, I pass out, and but I'm okay, I give blood. We're like, all right, whatever. So he goes and he gives blood. Well, he gets to the table, and he had told us when he was checking in, he said, okay, so I get tingling in my butt, and then I start to giggle, and that means I'm going to pass out. We're like, whatever, dude, you're weird. So he went and donated. Sure enough, he gets to the canteen. He leans back in his chair, and he starts giggling, and out he goes. And my daughter was like, well, he told us that was going to happen. I was like, you sure did. Yeah. He's like, I just, when my butt tingles, I start laughing, and then I'm going to pass out. I was like, well, now we know. Next time we see him, we got to take him for his word. So, the passing out doesn't happen very often. It does tend to happen a little bit more with our younger donors, just because they're scared and they don't know what to expect. But our adult donors that donate at community drives and that are regular donors, they don't even often sit at the canteen. They'll just give their blood, grab a snack, and head out the door, So it's not something to be nervous about, but definitely it happens on occasion. So I think that guy was the most unique.
We have our final question for tonight, and Sammy asks, what are you most worried about, during a blood drive?
Long waits. I don't like, of course, I don't want anyone to ever have a reaction or not feel well after they donate, but I don't want our donors, I don't want us to get behind on processing our donors. I don't like for people to have to wait a long time because, you know, their time is valuable and I want us to respect them as donors. We do say that to allow an hour and 15 minutes to donate blood from start to finish. So we used to say 45 minutes. So we've added some time, mostly because of some COVID, you know, things that we're having to do. We have to disinfect everything after a donor comes through. So everything in health history, the blood pressure cuff and whatever, the oral thermometer, and then the bed we have to wipe down after they get up, you know. So it takes a little bit longer because the bed has to dry. Oh my gosh, our staff are standing around fanning beds now. It's crazy. But I want the donors to have a good experience because I want them to come back. And so I want us to be able to see them in an efficient manner. And it doesn't always happen, you know, and sometimes that's our fault and sometimes it's just not. You know, sometimes it's our presentation and how people are coming in. Sometimes it's because we're short-staffed, but we're still trying to collect as much blood as we can. So I just try to encourage the donors to, you know, to remind them why they're there and how important it is, and that we appreciate that they're taking the time to be there. So, yeah.
Mahan, can we do 2 more questions because we have 2 more members asking?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So Anne asks, what was the best drive you have ever done?
So if you think about best drive as far as the highest number of collections, units collected, it was probably one of my LJ blood drives, I would think. And they run every other month. And, you know, little mountain town, and they come down off the mountain and they all have a social hour. It's like bingo night at the blood drive. And so they all see each other, and they still have been donating, even though they're an elderly population, they've still been donating all through COVID, which has been amazing. But I think they collected 136 pints, and that might have been my largest. Sometimes the high schools go over that, but lately they haven't been getting even close to that. But if you talk about best drive as far as how I felt afterward, we did an honor of drive for one of my daughter's friends who had cancer at the time, and you know, she was there and able to talk to the people that were giving and thank them for the donations that they gave her. You know, that she had needed during her battle with cancer. That was probably the best drive as far as warm fuzzy.
We have a final question from Arushi, and she asks, have you ever had to take care of an emergency during a blood drive?
Okay, so again, I am not a medical professional and I am not trained. So our phlebotomists go through a very specific training program, and it involves a lot of FDA regulations and a lot of things. So no, I don't handle the emergencies. I might, I definitely watch, you know, canteen sometimes when I'm at the blood drive, and I've definitely hung on to somebody if they were going to pass out, you know, held their shoulders or whatever, or seen that they weren't feeling well and notified the staff before that happens. And I can get a cold compress for their neck. You know, and I kind of leave it there. I do know that we want to get them to the ground so that they don't fall out of a chair, and that we want to prop their feet up. I know what to do, but I really leave that to our staff because, again, I'm not trained on those FDA regulations, and I don't know, you know, what if I did something wrong. I've literally had nightmares about that, where I walked out of a blood drive and there was, or not even been to a blood drive, just been on a city street, and somebody walks out of a blood drive and they pass out in front of me. You know, what would I do, and how would I be liable for that care? So I really try to let the staff handle it. Not that I would ignore a donor ever, but you know, I do what I can, and then I call them over because they're the ones that should handle it. And they handle it really well. I have had to, at Central last fall, we had a donor who just didn't feel well, and it was for an extended period of time. And there's a set amount of time before we have to call EMTs. And we had been notified from the school that the student was probably not being honest about how she felt. And but we gave her the option, and we said, if you still don't feel well, we're going to have to call, the EMTs. So we had to lock down the school. So in that way, I was talking to the administrators and trying to explain to them what our policies were and why we had to do that, and that it would protect them and protect us. And so, there are things that I can do during an emergency situation. But again, I mean, that wasn't a real emergency because she was fine. But I could do things like that. But as far as caring for the donor, I don't have to handle that.
All right, excellent. So we have to wrap up for the night. So that ends our Q&A session.
Okay.
First up, I'd like to thank you so much, Mrs. Mahan, for your time and the wonderful presentation. It was amazing. You've definitely inspired a lot of our students tonight to participate in our ongoing blood drive and also to just get involved with the Red Cross. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for speaking to all of our HOSA members.
Yeah, thank y'all. I appreciate it.
So to close out our event, we'd like to thank all of you for joining this conversation virtually and making it interactive.
We're going to leave our QR code for attendance up for 30 seconds. This video will be posted on our YouTube channel, and the form will close on Monday, March 22nd. A quick reminder, if you have any questions, be sure to contact either me or Madison, and we can connect you with Ms. Mahan.
And we also left the blood drive information, including the sign-up QR code on the right for those who are interested. All right, thank you, Ms. Mahan, for speaking. Thank you, members, for tuning in, and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.